Good morning and welcome to the NLA breakfast session, talking this morning about Brexit and the impact on construction, engineering and architecture. My name's Leanne Tritton and I'm the Managing Director and founder of Ing Media. And we have an amazing panel this morning, and I am delighted that we're all here today because I think their experience of what's actually happening on the ground with Brexit is incredibly informative for all of us. I mean, obviously, Brexit needs no introduction. We've been talking about it for forever. But now we've left the EU, and what is actually happening on the ground? I think over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been given many assurances, many predictions about what's going to affect our industry. And what's most important today is to find out actually what's happening and how can we work our way through some of the challenges. I just want to introduce our panel this morning. We have Stephen Barrett, who's a partner from Rogers Stirk Harbour Partners, RSHP, and of course they've just announced the opening of a Paris office, so it'll be fascinating to find out why they feel that they've had to do that. Is that because of Brexit? Then we have Martin Hitchen, the CEO of Rehau, and again, very interested to find out what's happening from his perspective, and I think sort of having a slightly more optimistic view of the marketplace. Tom Mather, construction director from Be First. If anybody knows anything that's going out in Barking at the moment, it's an extraordinary amount of construction on the ground, and I can't wait to hear what he has to say about what's actually happening there. And of course, Elsie Owusu, who's the principal of Elsie Owusu Architects, and I really want to know from a smaller business how that's impacting, how Brexit is impacting. We'll be talking today about materials, zero carbon, skills, and the ability to procure jobs. So thank you very much for all the panelists. Before we start, though, we're going to, in typical NLA style, they've got a series of polls that we're going to be doing. So we thought we'd kick off the morning by finding out how everyone's feeling about Brexit at the moment. Are you optimistic? What's your viewpoint now? So I'm going to ask if the poll has just popped up on your screen. Unfortunately, the hosts and panelists can't vote, but all of you can. So how are you feeling about Brexit now that we've officially left the EU? Are you positive, neutral, or negative? And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the results are there, and certainly compare them at the end of the session to see if we still have the same view. So I think before we go forward, what I'd like to do then is start off by asking Stephen Barrett from Rogers Stirk Harbour to give us his opening remarks.
Thank you very much. And I think you're very brave to join fairly early in the morning to talk about Brexit, a subject which I think we're already mightily sick of. That said, I think Brexit in reality has only just started. And in particular, the so-called deal that was signed at Christmas and came into effect on the end of December, has actually had some real and tangible effects on our business. We have decided to open a Paris office. This is, I think, a direct consequence of Brexit and reflects the long relationship we have with France. We've had business in one form or another in France for about 50 years. It's through different entities. And what was seamless and easy and quick has become difficult and more frictionful and uncertain. And I think the uncertainty in itself has direct consequences. My perspective, and I declare this straight away, is, as a European, I'm half French, I'm married to a German doctor, is that I've built a business through RSHP gradually, quite naturally in France. And Brexit puts that in jeopardy unless we take some very concrete and direct actions. Tangibly, one of the things that we note is that UK architectural qualifications are no longer recognised in France. They were until the 31st of December. They are no longer. And whilst I think as a practice, we will find a way of navigating the difficulties ahead, and we were just talking about this before we started, I think our profession generally, whether it's in construction, architecture, engineering, is an optimistic profession, otherwise we wouldn't get anything done. And I think we're confident that we're going to be able to build something very positive out of this. But I think the fact is that there is a sense that a lot of the effort that we're having to put into things now is unnecessary. It was unnecessary only a month ago, or a month or two ago, and therefore is regrettable. And without the kind of confidence that we have that we necessarily will work this out for not just for us, but for future generations, young architects, either from the European continent who wish to work in London, London, a city that was seen as being inclusive and diverse and being very much a magnet for talent. You know, if you were a young, ambitious architect for the last 20 years, I think London was the city globally that you'd want to come to. As you probably know, Bloomberg ran a poll in September, and 40% of Londoners, that's not 40% of Europeans in London, but 40% of Londoners talking about moving to the continent. And I think it's too soon to tell what the impacts of Brexit in a direct and practical sense are, because we're only a month and a half in. This week, Dominic Raab said, give it 10 years. I know from speaking to people about just this last year, kind of 10 lost months, that 10 years is unthinkable. And it's taken us 10 years to build a good business in France. So the idea of waiting 10 years to see what the benefits are seems to be very deeply regrettable, basically, and rather aggressive step. I think we're confident about making this work going forward, but I think one of the reasons I'm happy to be vocal about this is I think it is about future opportunities as well. Those people in the past who could have come to work in London who will no longer be able to, but also vice versa. And I think the fact is that with a view to kind of international business, the kind of philosophically open kind of culture that we have in our practice. In 2016, when the Brexit vote took place, we had 40% of our staff that were European, non-British, effectively. That has dropped. Whether that's a natural drop, whether that's a revealing drop, I'm not sure. But I think for those people and for those people to come who would wish to have worked in London or would wish to work on the continent from the UK, having studied in the UK, again, a magnet for excellent architectural education, I think these raise very real concerns. And so for us, Brexit is not neutral. I think its effects have been masked by COVID to date. I don't think we know truly what the impacts are, you know, either in terms of movement and travel. You know, one of the reasons we could work in Paris for many, many years from London is it was really only 2 hours train ride away. And there were cultural differences, obviously, but those were, if you like, enriching. They were difficulties to be embraced. But what the difficulties we face now are administrative and feel like a loss. It's always harder losing something that you once had than moving towards something that you're seeking going forward.
Thank
I don't
you.
know whether that's 5 minutes.
No, Stephen, that was great. You hit the time perfectly. I just couldn't find my unmute button. I think that's a fascinating point, actually, that last point about loss and not knowing what we're heading towards. And I think that's an important part of this. If the outcome was clearer, I think for our industry, it would be easier. But what I just want to do is give you some feedback on the poll. And I don't know if anyone will be surprised by the outcome of this. 30% of our audience is neutral about Brexit, 66% are negative, and we have 4% who are positive. So really interesting poll, I think, considering we're already in the thick of it. So now I'm going to go to Martin Hitchen from Rehow, CEO of Rehow. Can you, Martin, how's it affecting your business and from point of view?
I mean, firstly, I think I can echo some of the points that Stephen made. It's you know, this limited time that we had over the Christmas break to get our systems and processes in place because of the late deal with the EU really has added a huge amount of complexity to our business. We've got hauliers still struggling to get documentation right, and in a recent poll run by one of the trade associations, over 80% saying that they're having issues, that they're well publicised in congestions at ports and leading to delays. And I think we have to reflect also from a manufacturing and from an engineering point of view how embedded our supply chain with Europe has become. And as a result, Brexit has just led to some really significant delays, and also some significant increase in costs. We've now got very lengthened supply chains, and I think when I asked someone the other day about this, I think the understatement of the year, it's an unwanted distraction, also considering COVID. There's been also some challenges because of this late deal in terms of additional duties. We've found in particular the issues that we've had in terms of also our relationship with Ireland has caused as many, if not more, issues than our imports. It has to be said, despite all of that, consumer confidence remains relatively positive. And I think sort of one of the common themes is that there is a feeling that somehow we will get through all of this. We've had good support from some of the European forums supporting this transition, and also from, we're a German-Swiss company, so actually also from our internal systems, although there is a huge amount of opportunism around Brexit. We've got accountancy firms charging £500 an hour for advice at the moment around Brexit. So it's a very challenging situation for us. There's also one of the other factors that we're facing at the moment is that there's, and then we, as a European business, with also a seat in a number of European Brussels-based trade associations, there's almost a debate happening about whether UK members are still valid in some of these forums, which is a real shame, because we've and I think we echo what Steve had said before, we've really over the years actually benefited hugely from some of these sort of some of these approaches and some of the sort of common legislation that's come about from the EU. So that's going to be a challenge for us going forward. In particular, the whole issue around sustainable construction and the development of and having a common understanding of the use of recycling in products and so forth is going to be a huge challenge for us. Having said that, like I said, from my point of view, I think and I feel that some of the administration issues that we've got will settle down, and I've got to believe that, and we will find a way through. And also from my point of view that that there may be an interesting dynamic in terms of the future of British manufacturing. In particular, there's a number of customers that we deal with who feel that there will be, partly because of the supply chain issues, a bounce back or an uplift in terms of small and medium companies manufacturing products that perhaps in the past we look to import. So it's a kind of like like I said, from my point of view, a very mixed picture. But I have to, and perhaps that's a personal point of view, I have to remain positive going forward.
Thanks very much, Mark. I think that your point about positivity, it's sort of where we're all stretched beyond our normal levels of optimism, aren't we, with COVID and everything else? I mean, my goodness, we're digging deep for optimism, that's for sure. Before I go on, I'm going to ask the team to put up another poll, and this one is all about moving out of London. You've probably read in the press that apparently there's 700,000 people who've left London already due to the pandemic and who knows, Brexit. So what I'd like to know is if work colleagues out of London in the last few months. As you can see up there, it's yes, no, or intending to. So if you can in that poll. Just one other bit of housekeeping before we go. I forgot to say right at the top, but I assume you all know how to do this now, and that is make sure you type in your questions at the bottom of the screen for our panelists for later on. So now I'm going to go over to Tom Mather, who's the construction director at Be First, and what's happening. Is it as bad? Is it all made up? Are you guys just sort of complaining about stuff? What's actually happening on?
I think first things first, to echo earlier points, this deal of what is made to feel like a deal has come at a terrible time for the kind of the construction industry, and particularly building right now. To give you some context of what Be First are doing, we've got some in the region of 2,500 homes that will be on site from April 21. 60% of them are at affordable rent. We've got another 3,500 in the kind of imminent pipeline for kind of next year and the year after. So that equates in context to about sort of $250 million on site, and another $250 million that I need to get into contract in the next few months. So straight for me, it's really, really bad timing. And I want to kind of address that point to first off, because I think as Stephen said earlier, the details were hazy at best. We're in the middle of a global pandemic, which has pushed output down by around 25%, 30% anyway. And across my portfolio of projects, I've got about 26 weeks of lost time in the last 12 months. So we're fighting ongoing delays and supplier issues owing to lost time due to illness, self-isolation, which has pushed our certainly pushed our outputs down significantly last year. And then we've come into January, and our expected outputs are about 50% in January. And again, that's because of a lack of labour, straight up a lack of labour. We've hardly laid a brick in January, and that comes from a couple of reasons. Most of the people who are working on our construction sites, who are qualified bricklayers, are European, and most of them went home over the Christmas period. Now they came back into the country and had to either self-isolate or deal with the having COVID, and therefore couldn't come back to work. But the manifestation is that like, we can't exactly say what happened. What I do know is that some people have still not come back. So some workers have still stayed over in Romania and Poland and other Eastern European countries that haven't yet managed to come back because of the situation going on in the country. Is that a Brexit thing? I don't think we can clearly state that. The material delays that we're currently experiencing. So from my projects, quick list here, I've got a full pump set that's stuck in Italy, a full site worth of electrical equipment that's in Rotterdam, a couple of thousand bricks that have gone missing, and some precast planks I bought from the continent that are 12 weeks late and counting. Now, some of those are caused by suppliers having not been open or having had delays themselves owing to COVID. Some of it's caused by it being stuck in ports because of lack of containers. Some of it is purely because hauliers can't sort the paperwork out and therefore can't get stuff on the back of a lorry and get it over here. So this pump set that's in Italy, the paperwork just can't get sorted out, and potentially we're going to physically send someone to get it. That's the kind of the level of level that we've got to. Can you blame that all on Brexit? Again, I don't think you can. What we've done previously to this, and I make the point that this is a 2 years worth of planning thing, is that I have equipment and materials everywhere. So I've got windows that were coming in from Denmark that are stored between Charlton and Chadwell Heath. I've got another set that are in Crewe, so we found space in Crewe near a precast yard to store them there. And us with our supply chain had to adapt over the last 2 years anyway. So we're finding that we're still doing that adaptation piece. On the employment point from Stephen talking about the kind of the lack of, or the change in talent, and from our perspective, building, speaking to our major subcontractors, they haven't actually seen a particular issue with the directly employed labour force. The directly employed labour we've all essentially applied for right to remain. The companies themselves are registered to, albeit it is a cost, but it's a small cost to register to be able to bring talent in, so bring people from the European Union into the country to work. What their concerns around is that the top up labour, so whilst the core might be the top up labour that would previously be kind of casual, from our perspective, hasn't come back or isn't available already, and so we're kind of seeing an impact of that. And we've also got throw into there, from my perspective, we're building mostly mid and high rise apartments. You've got the building safety bill and the uncertainty around that you've got to throw into there as well, which is affecting material supply and what we can use on site. So again, can you say that all of the impacts we've had is down to Brexit today? No. And in 1 month, to be honest with you, I can't tell you that what's happened with Brexit has been noted on site, because we've had 2 years of this, and it isn't getting any better. One point I will make is that people have told me that with pandemic and Brexit, we'll see tender price inflation potentially go negative. Absolutely not. Tender price inflation is around 3 or 4% and rising as it currently goes, because of the uncertainty we've got. And really, we need to think about how, as opposed to looking at the bad side of it, from my perspective, we need to look at the positives that can come out of it. As an industry, we manage risk, and I'd say, in general, we manage risk really well. So in spite of Brexit being an deal, we still need to make sure that everyone gets the right levels of protection in agreements, and we do that properly, so that we all make sure that there's no one who's particularly burdened with a financial impact. The 4 years of uncertainty we've had since Brexit was announced has meant that we have done things like stockpile. One of the key points, so Martin's point, dead right, exactly what we've done. Look at British suppliers. So we're using more British suppliers of stuff. Why buy a kitchen from Italy when you can buy a kitchen from Worthing? The kitchen's made in Worthing, it's manufactured in Worthing. Yet it costs you more, but you get rid of that uncertainty from a risk perspective. That means I don't have to pay for that transfer of risk. And I think that there's a really big opportunity here to start buying British and start developing a supply chain for some of the things that we've been reliant on in the continent for years, and buying those from Britain. I say straight up now, steel has increased in 25% cost since November. Why is that? Well, there's some supply issues through China and India. There's also, we didn't produce any in the UK during the first part of the pandemic. So that's naturally going to lead to a shortage, which is going to put prices up. We need to look at helping people with regards to that buying British. And I think the construction playbook that the government has put out is a poor effort to tell us what we're already doing. And there's a big opportunity here for government to step in and look at ways of allowing us to be more innovative with the way that we're purchasing, allowing us to help with not relaxation of building regulations, but ensuring that the building regulations support the drive that we have to be more innovative and to use different methods of construction, particularly around the modern methods of construction piece that the government is pushing really hard. And my last point, particularly in Barking and Dagenham, is there hasn't been a better opportunity in generations to rebuild the economy with reasonably paid, skilled jobs. One thing that we're doing, which we've picked up quite quickly on, we've partnered with a reliable apprenticeship training agency. We've engaged some local delivery partners through our supply chain, and we've put together an apprenticeship program that focuses on training skills and job security and keeping jobs in the borough at Barking and Dagenham. So ensuring that we support our apprentices, we bring them into the industry, and we support them to make sure they don't just fall at the other side and disappear and do something else. And we're beginning to see, it's not an overnight task, but we're actually beginning to see some green shoots rewards from what we're doing with that. And that will, it's not going to be an overnight thing, but hopefully those bits of work with regards to working with local people and getting them involved in jobs will do something to kind of counteract those issues that some of the suppliers are beginning to see with that initial lack of labour owing to possibly Brexit.
Wow, Tom, that's an extraordinary sort of account, and also a great reminder to anybody who's in the world of comms, where we oversimplify messages to understand the complexity of everything in this industry. You know, I mean, really hats off to you for just managing through this process. Quite extraordinary. I'm just going to respond to the poll that we did earlier in terms of if you've known people who have or your colleagues have left. So again, very surprising, 41% of people know someone who has left London. 49% have said no, they don't know anyone, but 10% have said they know people who are intending to leave. So again, very interesting. I'm just going to, before we go to Elsie, I'm going to ask for two more polls actually to just stress out Kat from the NLA. So the first one is, have you recruited anyone from the EU since January? I'm really interested to know how that process has worked for people. So I think Kat's going to pop that poll up first. So have you recruited anyone from the EU since January? Yes, no, or intending to? And then after that, I would actually like her to put up a secondary poll, which is, have you recruited any other international candidates since January? So is this giving an opportunity to go to the rest of the world? So I think Kat's going to put that up very shortly. And then I'm going to ask Elsie to finish off our sessions with our speakers. And Elsie, you know, are you seeing opportunities? Are there opportunities for better partnerships? Over to you.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I think we have to, from my point of view, consider the combined effect of COVID and Brexit as great disruptors. The world has changed, and as everyone keeps saying, perhaps it's a cliche, we're making it a different normal. And I've gone from being a complete skeptic of Brexit to seeing a huge number of potential opportunities. We are working and have worked for a long time both in the UK, Nigeria, Ghana, China, and before COVID, we were trying to develop digital ways of working and digital relationships. So that's been given a boost. I have to say that we have never had a project in mainland Europe, never been invited, never got round the OJU process. So feeling locked out of that, we see this disruption as an opportunity. And when lockdown happened and all the existing systems fell apart, we sort of realized that we still had a 19th century mindset, and that we still thought that somewhere at the back of our minds, to be a real architect, you had to go into an office every day. And now we realize, of course, as everybody else does, that this isn't true. And lockdown has proved that we could work from a distance and remotely. And this has improved our international relationships enormously. So the projects that have been on the back burner in the countries where we work for ages and ages have been reignited, partly because I think people have stopped using that travel time that I mean, the huge amount of time we spent traveling backwards and forwards, mostly out of courtesy, I now realize, because, you know, if a client wants to believe that you're taking them seriously, well, you have to turn up. And you have to turn up and sit face to face in a room for maybe an hour, and then spend sometimes up to 3 hours toddling backwards and forwards. And, you know, if that client is really important, they expect you to fly 3,000 miles at enormous cost to resource and everybody's carbon footprint, to show up, basically to convince them that you think they're important. And, you know, we have had a situation in Ghana where we flew whole teams out because we had, you know, we had a presidential project. And so we all flew out, stayed in hotels, basically for an hour and a half with the great man. No regrets, but, you know, an incredibly wasteful way of doing business. We have had ideas for a development company of our own, and we set a development company up called Artist Constructor. And of course, we haven't had much time to do anything about that. But now, with time, we've lodged our first planning applications. We are going through wonderful process, design review panel. Who knew about design review panels for small projects? So our original concept was to build live work homes for artists, architects and creatives. And with COVID and working from home, this has become almost the norm for everybody. Everybody is working from home. And with the Brexit transition, I do believe that the more successful small and micro practices working locally, as Tom has just said, will come to the fore. And I actually think that if we get it right, architects in the UK, and especially diverse architects, can see this as a huge opportunity. Like many BAME architects, we have cultural links with non-European markets and local markets primarily. And we can win work in these areas. Africa is said to be the largest growing market in the world. And as the UK turns its attention from to the Commonwealth and the non-European market, again, you know, there are huge opportunities here. And we've already seen an upswing in approaches. We have now got consultancies in Africa, such as the Ghana Museums and Monuments Board, who we've been talking to since 2000. As soon as Brexit hit, there was an agreement made between the Ghana government and the UK government. And we were appointed as consultants within 24 hours. So Brexit has helped in that a lot of BAME people, particularly young people, who weren't getting work due to discrimination and another sort of lockout rather than lockdown, are ready to join the workforce and are being recognised for their talent. So as part of the so-called home market. So of course, COVID and Brexit is happening at the same time, and the situation is so interlocked, I don't think it's possible to separate. But a lot of BAME young people are losing their jobs, and it's now time for you know, the likes of Be First to really look at that talent, which hasn't been recognised. And I know Barking and Dagenham, there are huge numbers of young people from these vibrant communities, you know, who have suffered and will suffer as we come out of lockdown. So in response, I think there is an opportunity, and there's an opportunity to recognise talent that is home talent and is diverse talent. And I would feel sad if we went from saying, so we can't be European and therefore we have to be local and we can only employ people within the immediate locality. I think diversity in the broadest sense is going to be almost a sort of coincidence of lockdown and Brexit. And with lockdown, it is, and the furlough scheme, it is last in, first out. So lots of BAME and diverse young people are losing their jobs and are starting their own creative studios. And so we're now collaborating with 6 small studios internationally. And so to me, this is an unintended consequence or unrecognized consequence of Brexit. So we are all Europeans, but I think some of us have been thought to be more European than others. And I think it's now time to look around ourselves and broaden our scope and see the opportunities.
Elsie, thank you very much. What an important sort of reminder. I mean, it's when I was listening to you, you know, I'm Australian. I've been here for 26 years, and I grew up, we were still singing God Save the Queen in Australia when I was a girl. And I was really shocked when I first got to Heathrow and I wasn't European. I had to sort of stand in the queue, and I felt hurt. I mean, I've got over it, obviously, but I think it's a really interesting perspective that perhaps we should be looking, to the rest of the world. But just on our poll, I just wanted to come back in terms of, have you hired a European since January? 5% said yes, 89% said no. That may be because no one's hiring at the moment, but 5% are intending to. And I think that Kat's going to put up the other poll shortly about, yes, have you recruited any other international candidates since January? So yes, no, or intending to, and I think that will be very interesting as well. And maybe sort of now we can move on to the audience in terms of questions. I'm just going to sort of kick off one question, really, for any of the panelists, and again, it's about recruitment. And have you seen it? And I think often we hired Europeans because it was really simple. I know from my business, if I had a European in the office and they were great at what they did, there was no paperwork. If there was someone who was great, who was from another country, you really thought very, very carefully about undertaking that sort of 8-month expense and everything else. So are you seeing sort of more freedom in terms of recruitment internationally? Is the government helping us to do that? I'd be interested in Stephen. Have you got a view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do, and also it's a good opportunity to, in some ways, respond to Elsie. I think what we're talking about is the increase in the number of barriers, and I'm very conscious that the thing that we don't want to have is too Eurocentric a view of this. And as I say, I declared myself as a European in more senses than one. But I think what I regret as a Londoner is the notion that if you like, the borders are going up, that the shutters are coming down, not just to Europe, but despite claims to the contrary, that is actually a phenomenon that's in some ways a kind of closure or an increase of friction internationally anyhow. So to see Brexit as either or, it seems to me a kind of, in some ways, a mistake. I think it's about barriers to recruitment, it's about barriers to movement. And I think, my own personal view, and as part of a kind of international practice, is that we benefit from minimizing those barriers full stop, in the interest of diversity of talent, of perspective. I think, we have work across the world. We have work in China, we have work in Australia, we have work in Latin America and the States. And you find ways of overcoming the difficulties of working in those markets. But it's an extraordinary benefit when you don't actually have to swim against the current in those places. I also think that the consequences of Brexit, and again, one can argue about whether these are short or mid-term or even long-term, is that as a market, for investment and for growth, that the UK and London in particular, one has to say, will suffer. So the kind of opportunities that Elsie was talking about generating, well, I think there is that law of unintended consequences, and I'd be very positive about that. I also think that there's just generally going to be less work and less investment and less growth in London as a consequence of the economic fallout of Brexit. And so that means there will be less opportunity for practices or businesses or construction to employ people. Now, of course, if you've got a choice between a local and an international, I think, there are lots of advantages to having a local, but I know as part of a diverse practice, we benefit enormously from the diversity of views that people from different backgrounds bring to projects and bring to an understanding of international markets. And I say this partly as an exporter in this context. I mean, I think, we've been exporting our business to the continent for many years, whether that be Spain or France principally, but also places like Switzerland and Italy. And I think it's just regrettable to think that those opportunities just become much, much harder. And I recognize, in what Elsie said about seeing Europe as a kind of closed shop to Europeans, I mean, even the experience you've had at the border. But what's happened since Brexit is many more people are having to go through those border controls, not less. It's more people who are having to encounter those barriers. And you could say it's more equal, and it means that more people are experiencing the same process, but I'm not necessarily certain that's a good thing.
Elsie, do you want to respond to that, or does anyone want to respond?
Well, I suppose not to be too po-faced about it, you know, there is an expression, vox populi, vox dei, which is the voice of the people is the voice of God, and there is nothing we can do about that vote that took place. I'm not saying, you know, let's just make the best of it, but even the terminology that we use, you know, what picture comes into your head if you say a European? You don't see a young Black woman of 25, say. So, I mean, I think that our culture is not just the culture of the empire, but also the culture of Europe as an empire is embedded in our thinking and our doing. And I think that with Black Lives Matter and all the conversations we've had about decolonization, decolonizing from Europe should be part of that conversation. I think there's huge talent, not just in the BAME communities, but I think intersectionally amongst women who have left the workforce, for instance. You know, lots of women leave architecture and never come back because they consider the culture of our profession to be unwelcoming. You know, so I think we need to take a look at ourselves and see who is out there just down the road. You know, I mean, I recognize the stuff about, you know, barriers and needing a passport, but there are many, many people who don't need passports to get into architecture, who are sitting at home, working from home, have been working from home for ages and ages and ages, so know about the protocols of working from home. So, you know, let's look next door. Let's look down the road. Let's look at women with children who have been excluded from the workforce. Let's look at young BAME people, hugely talented, who are facing so many barriers of getting into the profession, not least that, you know, they're being recycled so that they get to part 3 and then they have to go back again to part 1 because some of the unaccredited courses that they've bought at very large expense stop them from getting into the profession. So there are barriers and barriers and barriers which we can turn our attention to now. And you know, for Stephen, you know, work with black women in architecture, work with the Paradigm Network. You know, there are 500 people in those 2 networks alone that have very limited access to the market and don't need a passport. Just go get them, you know, talk to them, invite them in.
I have absolutely nothing against anything you said, Elsie, obviously. I think you know, my perspective is also about working in Europe. You mentioned you've never been invited. I think we've invited ourselves historically, but I recognize a lot of the things you say. I think the question is, to me, it's about exclusion, and I recognize that in some of the things you said, you know, there's a perception of exclusion for a lot of communities that you've mentioned from the mainstream, full stop. And I think, you know, this is an opportunity, and I think you're right about that. But I also think that increasing barriers generally is not a positive.
Okay, so let's let me move on. I've got an interesting question from the audience here about the contracting sector increasing their commitment to apprenticeship schemes. And Tom, you talked about that a little bit before, but I'd like to broaden that out because, again, I think it's a little, you know, I often hear this, you know, as soon as you think apprenticeships, you always think about construction, and that's where, you know, construction has to pick up that weight. I'd be interested to hear not only from you, Tom, but from Martin and others about, you know, engineering, who else can pick up the apprenticeship weight as well. I mean, I think, you know, alongside this issue of, you know, the pandemic and Brexit, you've got, I think I have a 19-year-old son, and you've got a lot of his friends who are dropping out of university. University has failed them because it's not very, you know, It's first year, it's not great. So I think we're going to have a generation of kids who perhaps are choosing not to go into university. How do they get apprenticeships? How is the sector helping there? So perhaps Tom and Martin, if you could use there.
I mean, from my perspective, to pick up on one of Elsie's points from earlier, that so architecture, there are now degree apprenticeships available from an architecture perspective. So you don't need to be someone who's come from a privileged background or whose parents have worked incredibly hard or have worked hard themselves to go and do 7 years of paying yourself for university, then go into a job where you're not going to earn 30,000 quid straight off. So we don't have to do that anymore. So we as an industry need to get better at telling people about these opportunities and taking people on those kind of levels, actually identifying talent as kind of, just identifying talent and looking at those people, looking at how we can get them through those qualifications so they can become qualified. That, there are degree apprenticeships available for civil engineering, for mechanical engineering, for architecture, as well as the stuff down at level 2, level 3 for bricklayers. And we need to get better at making sure that we can, between us, we can get people onto those courses. And that is, and the second barrier for apprenticeships for me is pay. Like, we've got to get away from assuming that just because we're giving someone the type of apprentice, we can pay them £4 an hour. Like, we have to, as an industry between us, agree that the only way that we're going to get local people who would not necessarily be interested in construction is to get them a qualification where they can earn a living wage whilst becoming qualified, because otherwise they're not going to do that. They'll go into other sectors like retail or previously retail, which is where a lot of people have lost their jobs. And Martin, I don't know what you think around that.
I'd echo that completely, actually. And in fact, picking up on our own experiences, I mean, we've found recruiting for manufacturing, recruiting apprentices and as a way of dealing with that shortfall in the workforce is absolutely essential. I think Elsie's point is a very good one, and we are challenging our own recruitment methodology around that. I have to say, from my point of view, the problem that we've had, which is probably more around the engineering side, is how do you effectively bring apprentices through the organisation when everyone's working at home, and we haven't found an answer for that yet. That's really I'm the same as Julianne. I've got young children. My heart goes out to them. It's not a introduction to the workplace that I had when I was younger, and I don't think we've found the answer to that yet.
Can I just come back with just a small anecdote and say I live for my sins on Baker Street, and I looked out from my window and I was watching the new two-way system being put into place. Fantastic engineering, feat of engineering. So I was watching all these people in high-vis jackets, and over Brexit, the demographic makeup changed overnight. And I suddenly noticed that we'd gone from white workers to a whole mixed, diverse group. And I thought, where have these people been? How did they suddenly appear overnight? Because it was like magic. And what I then realized was that they're not apprentices. I mean, these people are proper grown-up, sort of blokey blokes, in their sort of late 30s and early 40s. And I had a chat with one of them, and they said, well, we just haven't been invited. We haven't been able to get work. And now we have got work. And it was, and there in Baker Street and in the country, in Sussex, the same thing happened. So I think that we kind of have to move away from the idea that in order to diversify the workforce, we're going to have to start with babies and apprentices. There are people out there, and female employees, who are unemployed or underemployed. And I think the creativity comes in saying, we have an emergency, but the solution is not to start from scratch. There are people who have been excluded from the workforce and are actually going to go into retirement never having worked. And that is such a loss of talent. It's a loss to the country, and it's a loss to those families, and particularly those who are disproportionately affected by COVID, as we can see from the statistics. So, I think it's a challenging time, but it's also a magical time if we can make it work.
Thanks, Elsie. I'm going to go to, first of all, I need to give you feedback on the poll we did about hiring people outside the EU, and 7% said they have, in fact, hired someone from outside the EU, 92% said they haven't, and 1% said they were intending. So I think that's quite interesting. I think perhaps, I don't know, if Kat can do this on the NLA, we can make up another poll, which is, have you hired from the UK? To Elsie's point, how many hires have happened from the UK? I think that's really interesting. I'm going to go to a question from the floor, and that is, you know, with independence from the European regulation, how do you think we can make the most of opportunities to lead the way in architectural and construction innovation? So that's quite a big subject, and we've got about 6 minutes left. So we need some speed thinking here. Stephen, innovation in architecture, or Tom, you've got your...
I mean, I just think, but first things first, we need to avoid the race to the bottom. We absolutely need to avoid the race to the bottom. We take Grenfell as an example. We will once it all comes out. We've both spoke about the value engineering, the cutting of corners, whatever else. Grenfell was a victim of the race to the bottom. Like, we are world leaders. Our building regulations have been adopted in 45 different countries, so people adopt our building regulations. Essentially the structural design of steel and concrete is essentially British standard that's just been adopted into European law. We need to be really careful here that we don't jump on a race to the bottom. That's my only point in it.
I completely agree, and I think we need to be very careful that we're leading, we're pushing the boundaries. I think you're more likely to do that if you're in a pool where there are contributions that continually lift, if you like, expectations and standards. And I think that the danger is becoming introverted and to, if you like, facilitate a kind of easy option. And I think Grenfell, sadly, is a kind of example of that.
Without wanting to sound like an old dinosaur, it's coming from the farthest reaches of the empire. We have seen British engineering, and we continue to see British engineering. And you know, from the railways in Africa, which were an amazing feat of engineering and design, not necessarily built for the right reasons, but you know, that whole market, that growing market, and the connection that that Africa has with the UK, not least in terms of language, the time, Greenwich Mean Time, in terms of the cultural connections, I think is being squandered. And the Chinese government is seeing a huge opportunity there, so that the infrastructure that is being designed, where there is an open door for British engineering, technology, architecture, design across 53 countries, is an opportunity. And I think it's really important that that opportunity isn't lost. And I mean, I don't know what that term race to the bottom means, because, you know, the places where British standards have been adopted, you know, in Ghana, we have British planning law and British building regulations, which are updated as the UK updates its planning law and updates its regulations. So, you know, it's not just Europe that tracks the British design, engineering, and indeed the rule of law. So, you know, British law, English law, I should say, rather than British law, English law is the world standard. And if you're doing a deal anywhere in the world, you can refer that deal to English courts, because people understand that there is a rule of law and that you will get a fair shake. So, you know, this is a huge, huge opportunity. And I think that it's really important that it's recognized, both for the young people who come from these diverse backgrounds, you know, who are locked out, have been locked out, for the talent that is here, for the resource that the UK has spent in educating people. which currently is going to waste. So
I think there's a danger though. There's a danger though in referring or being self-referential and patting ourselves on the back in the UK. There's many, many good things that we do, that we close ourselves to learning from other countries. I think there is a perception, for instance, in the UK, that we don't have things to learn from our European neighbours. And in terms of standards, in terms of sustainability objectives, in terms of transport infrastructure, there's a huge amount that we can learn. And I think we just need to be careful about kind of assuming that the British way of doing things is always the best. At least, let's say, I'm not even just talking about Europe, but just in terms of openness to the world, it's very important that we absorb rather than just project. And I think, you talked, Elsie, about the empire. I think there's a danger in some of the rhetoric that it becomes somewhat imperial and it becomes somewhat self-congratulatory. And I think that's a danger.
I think from my point of view, we can also learn from our own educational establishments. I mean, we're talking about innovation for contracting innovation in engineering. We have a long list of wonderful innovations developed in our own universities and then actually industrialized outside the UK. And I come back to my point earlier. I do believe there will be an opportunity, whether it's Brexit driven or not, but there will be an opportunity to actually encourage, and Tom's point about having the right sort of governmental support, encourage small, perhaps even startup companies to industrialize some of the fantastic work that's happening in our universities.
Yeah, thank you. I want to just, we've only got a couple more minutes left. So I just want to sort of link two questions that have come through together, really. And that is, again, about skills and training. And first of all, how we as an industry work in schools and academies to look at opportunities. And I think there's also the language around things like apprenticeships. So we all know situations where apprentices are seen as lesser, particularly than sort of graduates. It was interesting just through this chat. We've talked about, if it's architecture and engineering, we talk about talent. And if we talk about labor. So I'm just wondering, how can we really encourage people to go for apprenticeships and still get the same status and opportunity?
From my perspective, firstly, we do a lot of work in schools. We've had a lost year. I think we're all in agreement with that. We've not been able to do anything face to face or physically with young people in schools and community groups that we'd normally go out and reach out to try and encourage them into the industry through kind of the STEM scheme. So we've not been able to do that. But we do. We've got big plans, and particularly in Barking and Dagenham, we've got big plans to engage all the schools. The point on giving apprenticeships kudos, I think if you flip back 40 years, lots and lots of people who are now senior in this industry came through apprenticeship schemes. So particularly really poignant with the National Apprenticeship week before last, where I was seeing tweets and articles from managing directors about their time through the apprentices, starting off the bottom, working their way up. I think it's a societal thing that we've shifted, particularly in kind of the early 2000s. We shifted to sending everyone to university. We need to have that gradual change back to make sure that we can provide people with well-paid opportunities to start from completing completion of education at 18 years old or 16 years old, depending on what path they take, and get them involved in apprenticeships and get them training on the job. Point about working from home and training trainees is very difficult, and we need to make sure that we get balance going forward, that we don't just all decide that working from home is the future, and we actually get people on sites into offices to understand and learn. And that's a really important point for me.
Thank you very much, Tom. I think that's a really good wrap up. I think we've come to the end of our time. It's been a really fabulous discussion. To the panel, thank you so much for a fascinating just actually come to an end. I think we've got so many issues to keep going with this, but congratulations who's managing to work through this and lead the change. So thank you very much.